where they strung up a man, whom they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. If you're listening on a podcast platform, you will notice music has been added back to the show. I finally decided I would do just a bit of editing. I hate polishing up my show. I spend 10 to 15 hours researching to get the notes right. I sure don't want to spend another few hours of my life editing. I only have so many hours of my life left. Those of you listening on YouTube, well, you'll just have to add the music yourself. And now both my cats are attacking the microphone. Vic Hermanson sent me that clip of Annabelle Lee singing the intro, and I just had to use it. This led me to buying a new audio editing program so I could put the music back in. Trailer Trash Terror is what my show would sound like if I used better equipment, bothered to do more editing, and I was better at doing a podcast. It takes a lot of coffee to put this show together, and I drink only the best. Organic Man Coffee Trike 4501 McPherson here in Laredo. Julio roasts his own beans, so you get not only fresh brew, but quality as well. If it's too far to drive, you can always go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. I started working on this show about weird beasts several weeks ago, and I got sidetracked by other ideas, and I left this one in bits and pieces. It took me a while to get all of those bits and pieces put together. Some of these stories are from listeners, the people that sent me their stories on what happened to them or to folks that they know. I've been collecting a lot of stories over the years. Some I've already told on past shows, but I have new listeners and I find this information is in need of passing on. You never know when somebody might hear something and say, hey, something just like that happened to me. And then they'll send me their story. Others might listen in and decide to send me their stories anyway. If you want to share a story or two, send them to strangethings@arkanasa.com. Back in 1972, a tall, dark, hairy creature was seen in the town of Louisiana, Missouri. Being in Missouri, I'm not going to call it Missouri. I'm from Texas, and to me it sounds a bit odd. The creature was dubbed Momo. Momo was first seen by 8-year-old Terry and 15-year-old Doris Harrison in their backyard near what is today called the Marloff Hill Park in Park County. Terry Harrison was playing outside when he spotted the creature standing near a tree. It looked like some kind of a monster, which led him to screaming and running inside. The screaming alerted Doris Harrison, who peered out the window and saw this creature as well. When their parents arrived home, a search party of local law enforcement, a few highway patrolmen, conservation agents, and a politician or two were sent out looking for the monster. The politicians wanted to see if they could get the creature to vote for them. The description was a creature about 6 feet tall, standing upright on 2 feet. It gave off a putrid odor of mold and old garbage, and it growled, making weird noises. Other sightings of Momo said he may have been 12 feet tall, with a pumpkin shaped head, red eyes, and a scream growl that lasted several seconds. One teenager said Momo lifted up his car with superhuman strength. The reports of Momo received national press coverage, leading to visitors from all over the country descending on Louisiana to see if they could find Momo for themselves. I wonder how many folks accidentally drove to the state of Louisiana instead of the town. Sightings dwindled by the end of the summer of 1972. Local officials believed the creature to be either a bear or perhaps some local teenagers involved in mischief. In the late 1980s, 220 miles south from Louisiana, uh, south of Van Buren, Missouri, William Milner and John Skelton were camping in the woods. From the darkness outside the perimeter of the firelight came what sounded like huge apes making all kinds of noises. The sounds came from their north, followed by sounds from their south. Soon the two teens discovered they were surrounded. Trying to watch in all directions at once, the two boys stood back to back in an effort to not be surprised by an attack. The sounds kept getting louder as the creatures came closer. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds began to shift a little more to the east of their camp. Eventually, the creatures making these sounds grew distant and it was lost in the darkness. Think hard of what makes a sound like a huge ape, other than a huge ape. A lot of folks who watch movies about the jungle or the wooded areas will have heard the sounds of the kookaburra, a kind of a bird that makes all kinds of weird noises. Hollywood has decided that jungles sound like this one bird. Apes make their own distinct noises. Not much in Missouri sounds like a huge ape, as in nothing. Once the sun was up, the two packed their gear and began the long walk back to where they had parked. Their camping trip was cut considerably short by a few days. Milner says that he had wished that he had seen what was making all these noises. Even though he was terrified there in the dark, he was also fascinated. Had these two been novice campers, they might have been mistaken by some creatures making these sounds. Now, these boys were familiar with most animals that you would find out in the woods. If you're interested in reading a book about Momo, you can find one called Momo by Lyle Blackburn. Just look for it on Amazon.com. In Plano, Missouri, just off of Route 66, a man saw a huge black cat. It looked to be about 4 to 5 feet tall, solid black with a long tail. He thought he must be looking at the Ozark howler, a creature seen and heard all over the Ozarks, which span Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. The Ozark howler is also called the devil cat or the black howler. There are varying descriptions of the Ozark howler. Many witnesses say it's about the size and shape of a bear, only it's sleek like a cat, much bigger than any cougar. The fur is solid black. It has a long tail. The eyes glow as if lit from within, bright, fiery red. Some folks say it has horns like a ram. Others have seen antlers like a deer. One thing all the witnesses agree on was its yell. The creature makes a sound unlike any other animal. It screams or howls so loud that it hurts people's ears. Some say the sound can kill a person. Anyone hearing the yell say it makes your blood run cold. Just the sound is enough to make people want to be someplace else. The naysayers bring out the old circus train derailment as their explanation of this beast. According to these folks, a circus train has crashed just about every year in every state in our country. It looked I looked into the reports of circus train crashes. There have been quite a few over the years, but very few animals have ever actually escaped and were able to stay on the loose. Circus trains and weather balloons are being blamed for everything. How about a circus train attached to a weather balloon? I imagine that's going to be next. Reports of the Ozark howler have been recorded since the 1800s. Many think this creature is a flesh and blood being that must eat, sleep, and in order to continue existing, there must be more than one of them. Indians living in the area for hundreds of years told of a black creature that stalked the woods, preying on anybody unlucky enough to look like a tasty snack. In 2022, a man working the counter at a convenience store saw the howler walking across the parking lot. It looked like a huge black cat with glowing red eyes. It walked over to the fuel island, sniffed around a bit, and then went back into the trees. I wonder if perhaps there was a trash can nearby that had some meat in it that was attracting this beast. That same year in Republic, Missouri, the manager of a Whataburger saw the howler climbing out of their dumpster. I guess it was looking for the best hamburgers in the world. In 2023, a man riding his motorcycle through the countryside was chased by the howler. It sprang from the woods on the side of the road and chased him for several hundred yards. The motorcyclist was barely able to keep his wheels under him as he sped away, trying to keep one eye on the road and watching the beast with the other. He filed a police report once in town. The lobosome is another name for a werewolf. The creature is known in both Portugal and Brazil. The Brazilians have different theories on what might cause someone to become a lobosome. A small city called Hanapolis is known as the capital of the werewolves and has more werewolf sightings than any other city on the planet. One theory says the seventh son or the seventh daughter born to a family will become a werewolf. Sometimes people say when a boy is born after 7 girls that the boy will become a lobosome. Others think it's any eighth child that will turn into a werewolf regardless of their gender. Many legends have to do with how one transforms into a beast and then sometimes are able to transform back. In many of these legends, the lobosome will turn when they get to a crossroad on a Friday night at midnight, whether there's a full moon or not. In order to change back to human form, the lobosome must return to that same crossroad where they originally turned into the beast. Still, in other areas of the country, it's believed that a lobosome must run through 7 cemeteries before they can transform back. In some regions of Brazil, they believe a baby will turn into a lobosome if they're not baptized. If a lobosome should bite you and you're not killed during the encounter, you will also turn into a beast. You have just 12 days to find a cure before the change becomes permanent. There have been reported sightings in many towns all across Brazil. From 2008 to 2013, folks living in Canhotino were afraid to venture out after dark. Kids had to stay inside, and the police stepped up their patrols to try catching or chasing away the werewolf that was sneaking around town. The town of Hybaris was being plagued by a monster at the same time. People began suspecting their neighbors and were turning into monsters at night. The farm animals and pets went missing all over the country. I got these next few stories from some of my listeners and some people that I've talked to. Juan was at home when his sister dropped by at 5 o'clock in the morning. He answered the door half asleep, and his sister told him that his dogs were fighting in the backyard. Juan went to the gate to see about his animals. As he was opening the gate, a huge black dog came flying out the gate and ran down the street. This was immediately followed by a white dog. Juan pulled his cell phone out to use it as a flashlight. A third dog ran by him as he was stepping through the gate. In the yard, Juan looked for his dogs. As he was scanning the yard, he saw eyeshine from his animals. Then he heard the sounds of something big and heavy walking around in the dark. The sound went around the side of the house, so Juan ran to intercept the beast out front. Nothing came out, so he went back in, trying to see if his dogs were okay. They were acting as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened just a few minutes previous. Juan checked the whole yard, looking for any damage done by the intruders, but found nothing. With all of that noise, the dog fights, there should have been some evidence of destruction. There was no sign that anything had gone wrong. As Juan was driving to work, the very first song that came on the radio was Johnny, also known as Juan, Run Away. They had a woman come to the house and perform a blessing ceremony to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again. And as far as I know, it's never been repeated. But he did see three dogs that weren't his come flying through the gate, and there was that weird sound of something walking around his house. Here's a story that I have told before, and I'll tell it again. My wife and I were returning from San Antonio, Texas on a Sunday night, sometime around May or June of 2013. My wife had fallen asleep, and so I turned the radio up a little and I headed south, taking I-35 into Laredo. I was listening to Coast to Coast AM to keep myself awake. This was back when it was still interesting. They've changed their way of doing things here lately, and it's become more of a repeat show. Callers call in the same guys over and over and over and over. As we approached the north side of town, I turned the cruise control off and I dropped down from 65 to 60 to negotiate the curve under the railroad bridge that crossed the interstate. A lot of people who drive on the left-hand lane will suddenly discover they need to exit at Shiloh, and so they'll just exit without bothering to look to see if anybody's in the right-hand lane. I've had it happen to me so many times that now I expect it to happen. As I was coming up on the bridge, I could see between the pillars. I spotted what looked like some homeless guy who was completely naked, scuttling along the embankment of the road. It's a cement bank that runs at a 45-degree angle from the side of the road up to the top of where the railroad crossing is. He was skinny, pale. His arms were emaciated, as were his legs. It was so thin that you could see the bone structure under the skin. As I passed him, I had this horrible, creepy feeling that something about this guy was all wrong. The way he moved, as well as the way his arms and legs were bending, it looked more like a spider than a human. The cement retaining wall that this thing was crawling up was textured, as in very rough. Anybody crawling on it on their hands and knees, well, they wouldn't have much skin left. It was almost like a cheese grater. At the time, I had 24 years in law enforcement. I thought about stopping and going back to see what this guy was doing. He didn't appear to be in any kind of trouble, no kind of distress, but mostly it was just curiosity. However, having my wife along in the vehicle, and it was after midnight, I decided to keep going, figuring this guy was probably just drunk. That feeling of unease helped me make my decision. I told my wife about what I'd seen when we got to our home, and she said it sounded like just some drunk guy living under the bridge. After meeting with the guys from Expanded Perspectives, a podcast that covers all manners of bizarre subjects, we were in Jefferson, Texas, and we just happened to be sitting at the same table at the pre conference dinner. They mentioned their show. The show they talked about was The Rake, and they described what people were reporting. Well, once I got home, I started looking at images on the internet of what the rake looked like. And sure enough, that was what I thought I'd seen. The creature was paralleling the road, so I never actually saw its face or its eyes, but the body shape was as close to the drawings as I care to get. After looking into things pertaining to the rake, I've come to the conclusion that this was actually what's known as a pale crawler. A same general description, just a different name. You mention the rake, and right away everybody will say, oh, that was just some creepy pasta story that people wrote to scare other people. They'll claim that it was created by this website. Just because they gave it a name doesn't mean they created the creature. Now, every time I would approach the railroad bridge, I slow down and I take a long, hard look at the embankment just to see if maybe the thing has returned. Well, down south near the county line are a bunch of houses on the Milagro Ranch. Late one night, a man was sitting in his bedroom up on the second floor. The window looks out onto the roof of the garage. As he sat there, a white, emaciated creature went sneaking across the roof. It moved like a spider, looking for its next meal. The man was so shook up that he ran to his closet, grabbed his shotgun. He spent the night sitting in the corner of his room waiting for the creature to return. It never came back, but he still keeps an eye out for what might have been a pale crawler on the roof of his garage. Recently, someone spotted this same creature running across I 35 just south of Loop 20 overpass. They were driving south when they spotted a white, skin and bones looking person, very tall, come running from the brush on the west side of the interstate. The thing ran across the southbound lanes and jumped the K rail without even slowing down. It didn't put its hand down and leap over the K rail, it just simply jumped over it. It crossed the northbound lanes and disappeared into the brush on the east side of the road. It ran upright on two legs, but moved more like an animal. The witness was convinced that this was not a human. It was human shaped, but it looked too thin and it moved more like something out of a horror movie. After looking at the images of the pale crawler, the witness said that that is what he had seen. This sighting was within a few hundred yards of the railroad bridge where I'd had my sighting. Mines Road runs north northwest out of Laredo. There's an actual strip mine that gives the road its name. Once past the Columbia Bridge, you're either a Border Patrol agent working on a ranch or you're in the oil field. On one of the ranches, one of the workers was told to get some photographs of the equipment that he had set up on the ranch road by the supervisor. This was just a quick way to document items being used in the field. The worker clicked a few photos using his cell phone. Later, while looking at the images on his phone, the worker saw something weird standing near one of the pumps. He'd caught what looked like a tall, a very thin, extremely pale white creature standing looking around the edge of one of the pumps. And it was completely naked. Everyone that looked at the photo says that this also looks exactly like the pale crawler. It was early in the morning and time to get to work. The couple only had one car, so they had to travel together. As they were driving south on Mines Road, almost to the overpass, they saw a weird creature in the middle of the road. It was very light gray color. It was crouching in the center of the road down on all fours. To the couple, it kind of looked like a wolf or a dog. Kind of. As they drew alongside the creature, it dove right at their vehicle. It hit the side of the car with a loud thump, and they could feel the impact inside. The man began to slow down, wanting to have a look to see if any damage had been done to his car, or if maybe he'd hurt this animal. Well, the woman said, "Don't stop," thinking this thing could be dangerous. It was a lot bigger than any dog should have been. They continued on to their shop on McPherson, where she worked. Once there, the man got out and he examined the side of the car. There was no dent or any scratches, but the dirt had all been rubbed away from the side panel right where the thing had hit. Knowing the area where this happened, I asked if the thing might have looked like the pale crawler seen back in May or June, and my sighting had taken place less than a mile from where they had seen this dog or wolf creature. Monatis Creek is an area in Monatis Creek Lake is in the area, and there are warehouses and a lot of brush. I don't have a photo from my encounter, but there are images on the internet of what folks are saying is the pale crawler or the rake. I pulled one up and I showed it to the woman, and she said that that was kind of like what they had seen, just it was a lot whiter. Back in the bad old days, chemical companies would dump all kinds of nasty goo into Monatis Creek. In January 2000, Dr. Earhart of the Rio Grande International Study Center spoke before the Texas State Senate Special Committee on Border Affairs. Why do they have to give these things such god awful long names? He said that these toxic chemicals are coming primarily from Laredo, saying that the unregulated warehouses built along the banks of the creek that feed into the Rio Grande are a principal threat to the water quality. Considering Laredo and Nueva Laredo both get their drinking water out of the Rio Grande, well, it's a bad idea for chemical companies to be dumping their garbage upriver from Laredo, especially. This sounds a lot like a B movie plot. Someone or something is drinking polluted water and then turns into a wolf man or a dog man or some other creepy crawly thing. The trouble is, the idea isn't all that weird. Later on, after that weird wolf sighting, there was a report of a similar creature seen near Texas A&M International on Loop 20. It's not all that far from the first two sightings and the college, but there are houses all along the route where any kind of a creature would have been seen by somebody outside their home. One explanation that might link these sightings is the creature people are seeing is moving from place to place by means of transdimensional travel. That is, if these creatures being seen are the same creatures and not several similar looking beasts. I know it's not a good idea to use one bizarre theory to explain away another bizarre event, but then the folks who tell you that don't believe in anything not covered in a thick layer of science. The boys in the white lab coats don't believe anything. Baldemar Galvan, better known as Balde, has lived his entire life in the Beeville area. He has a group called the Bee County Bigfoot Research. He also looks into other paranormal activity. Balde also associates with other groups, all looking into unusual, unexplainable things from all over the country. He is a Lipan Apache. I was originally trying to get a hold of a man named Gabriel, whom I'd met at the Jefferson Bigfoot Conference, and somehow I accidentally got a hold of Balde instead. Uh, just one of those weird coincidences. And we wound up talking on the phone for probably 3 hours. Growing up in Beeville, Balde was fascinated listening to stories from the old folks who lived in the county. Back in 1924, a group of cowboys were out in the field herding cattle. This is long, hard work. When the sun went down, the cowboys would stay in a line shack, just a small cabin set in the middle of nowhere to give the workers some place to get in out of the elements. Most of them were just one room with a stove or a fireplace, maybe a table and a few chairs and a bunch of bunks. As the night was moving in, the men put their horses in the corral next to the cabin and they went in to eat and relax a bit before settling in for the night. They had dinner and then they played a few hands of cards to unwind. It was a cool night, so the windows were all open to get some fresh air into the small building. As they sat around the table, they heard something strike the side of the cabin. They thought it just must be the horses. Nothing out of the ordinary, so they continued with their game. The sound came again, only this time it was a bit louder. This got everyone's attention. The sound was nothing like a hoofed animal or a horseshoe should make. As the men sat there by the table, a creature appeared at one of the windows. It shoved its upper body through the opening. The thing was huge. Its body was covered in dark hair. The men all scrambled to get to the farthest side of the room, away from this monster. The creature seemed more curious than hostile. After looking around the room, it pulled its body away from the window and walked away. The men all said it kind of looked like a big ape, but it was more human looking than animal. From that night on, stories of the Monkey Man continue to be told by people living in this area. One day at about 10 or 11 a.m., Balde was riding along a road when he and his friends spotted something on a sendero. It was tall and covered in hair. His friend stopped the truck so Balde could grab his camera. The creature stepped into the tree line, so his friend dropped Balde off a bit farther along the road so he could try getting a photo on a pipeline where the creature should travel to shortly, but it never showed up. The image they both saw was a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Valdemar likes to take nature photos. He has traveled the countryside looking for anything to aim his camera at. One day in October or November, he found some apple wafers in a grocery store. Thinking that deer like apples, well, maybe these wafers would attract the animals for a photo shoot. Balde bought several packages and took them out to his deer stand. Scattering some of the wafers on the ground, he hoped this would draw the animals to the clearing. The next day, Balde went to the spot where the wafers had been. The area was quiet, and nothing was there to snack on his treats. This was a common occurrence. Animals come and go as they see fit. Balde clomb to the top of the deer stand and then waited for something to come out of the woods so he could click a picture of it. After sundown, the night got still. Balde sat there waiting for the deer. He heard sound. It was deep breathing, in and out, like some huge creature was lurking in the dark. Carefully, Balde stepped onto the ladder to get down to the ground. As soon as his foot landed on the dirt, the breathing sound stopped. This was odd behavior. If this was just some animal, it should have turned and ran away. Animals are not known to hold their breath so they can remain unseen and unheard. Balde turned in a circle trying to spot the creature, and it was too dark to make out anything but trees. After a few minutes, Balde clomb back up to his deer stand to see what might happen. As soon as he sat down, the breathing began once more. This huge creature was still there, watching him as he sat there. Balde stayed in the stand for some time, but he never got a look at the creature. On other occasions he has seen black panthers in the area as well as elk, but no huge hair covered creatures in that particular area. Near his stand, somebody had hit and killed a huge hog on the road. The hog was maybe 300 to 350 pounds. The next day, the carcass was gone. It wasn't drug away by scavengers. It looked like something had picked it up and carried the dead hog away. Balde began searching the area looking for tracks or prints or whatever had carried this huge hog into the trees. In the wooded area, he came across a set of footprints. They were barefoot, 13 or 14 inches long and about 6 inches wide. Soon after this, he received a phone call from Berclair, which is a small town northeast from Beeville. Someone had found some more tracks and they wanted Balde to come have a look. These footprints were right under a deer stand. It was huge, 19 inches long and 9 inches wide. The track was wet from the recent rain. The toes were all but gone, but Balde still looked at the track, wondering if it was even worth trying to make a cast. It's a common saying, if you see a track, cast it. You never know how it might come out. Balde mixed up the plaster and poured it into the track. Once the mixture was set, he pulled the cast up. Even without the toes visible, the cast was spectacular. The heel and the ball were quite distinct. The dermal ridges could be seen on the foot. Bigfoot hunting in Texas is reliant on receiving permission from landowners before setting foot on any location. Baldomero is well known to folks in the area, and they call him when they have unknown visitors at night. Baldemar began asking around to see if anyone had seen anything similar to what he and his friend had seen. A man he was talking to said, "You need to come to my office." Once there, the man pulled out a set of photos that he had taken while in the brush. The photos showed what looked like a lean-to built on the edge of a creek. The structure was made from 6-inch diameter logs drug up onto the edge of the bank. The gaps were stuffed with grass, making the assembled structure somewhat waterproof. In front of this lean-to was a mat made out of sticks. They were set side by side, giving someone or something a place to stand or kneel without getting wet with mud or water. The sticks were all about to an inch and a half in diameter, set together to make a nice little deck. Baldemar was scheduled to speak at the ECBRO, the East Coast Bigfoot Research Organization in Virginia. He asked if he could borrow the photos to show at the get together, and the owner said he could take the photos with him, but no one was to handle them or make copies of the images. The photos were quite a hit at the guest event. The people attending were amazed by what must have been a Sasquatch structure. Naturally, they wanted copies, but the owner had said no, so Balde complied with his request. He returned the photos to their owner once he was back in Beeville. One of Baldemar's neighbors had a huge goat ranch. The rancher was losing goats to some unknown predator, so he mentioned it to Balde. Balde was traveling along one of the back roads when he spotted a dead goat laying on the side of the road. Not wanting this animal to suffer any more than it already had, Balde stepped out to see what he could do. It wasn't dead, it was almost dead. The goat had a puncture wound at the base of its skull. The end was near, so he used his knife to end this creature's misery. When he slit the goat's throat, there was hardly any blood. It was as if the animal's blood system was almost empty. Wondering what was going on, Balde decided on a quick layman's version of an autopsy. Slicing the goat along the breastbone, he discovered a complete lack of blood inside. He pulled out all the internal organs and he found a hole punched through the heart and the liver. How could anything have sucked out all the blood and parts of the liver through that small hole at the base of the neck? The chupacabras, or goat sucker, has been seen all over Texas. Balde thinks that he may have found one of its victims. Here in Laredo, well, anywhere in the Border Patrol, sign cutting is a skill that's pretty much exclusive just to the Border Patrol. It's a form of tracking used to find groups of people crossing the border and proceeding towards the interior of the U.S. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. You're not just looking at footprints. You're looking at the branches. You're looking at other things. You're looking at animal tracks. You're trying to read the minds of the people that passed in front of you. The people leaving these tracks don't want to be found, so they try to disguise their trail through sometimes rather bizarre means. They'll walk backwards, they'll brush their tracks out with a branch, or they'll cover their shoes with carpeting so that they don't leave distinct footprints. To a good sign cutter, these are more of a distraction than an actual means of getting away. You're not just looking at the tracks, you're looking at everything. Agent Eduardo Chavez, working the evening shift, spotted the sign of a group of about 6 people crossing Mines Road, going from west to east. He drove his Tahoe along the road to determine the direction of travel, and then he alerted his fellow agents in the area that he was working a group. The group are what we would call brushwalkers. These are folks who are willing to walk through the ranches and the farms scattered around the border area en route to hoped for employment in the U.S. Sometimes they've been known to walk hundreds of miles, sleeping where they stop and eating what they are carrying. They're not to be mistaken for smugglers who are traveling the same routes carrying large parcels of illegal drugs. Simply looking at the sign left from their passing, there's no hope of knowing which kind of a customer you're going to encounter. You won't know that until you catch them. Other agents had gathered in the area and they were in the process of walking out the sign. This meant they had left their vehicles and they were out on foot, moving through the mesquite and the ratama bushes, following the trail that the aliens had left. While working sign in this way, you have to be quiet. You don't use your flashlight, you don't make any noise. If the smugglers, that's what you're following, know that you're on their trail, they will use any means available to escape. And this includes shooting in the dark in the direction of their pursuers. They call it recon by fire. Eddie began driving through the ranch trying to get ahead of the group. By getting part of the search party in front and another part in the back, the idea was to catch the aliens in the middle, drive up on them in the front, or walk up on them on the back. Eddie spotted 2 females running towards his vehicle. They looked haggard, uneasy, as they hurried in his direction. Most brushwalkers know that if they get in trouble, either sick or they are lost, the Border Patrol will help them out, including bringing them much needed medical uh, equipment. Eddie is a paramedic as well as being an agent. We work together because of this. The women told Eddie there was something chasing them. Eddie had worked this area on numerous occasions. There is cattle in most fields, but cows will shy away from anybody walking through their pastures. Coyotes tend to run every square foot of this part of Texas, but they tend to avoid humans, especially humans in a group. Mountain lions will chase down anything or anyone that they think they can have as a meal, but you won't know there's a giant cat following you until it's too late. Eddie asked the women what they were afraid of. The 2 women informed him that something big, they said it was as big as an elephant, had been on their trail for the last half hour. They had seen this huge black shape following behind them, and the group they were in had run for some time. When exhaustion had set in, the group had found a thick clump of brush in which to take refuge. As they lay there in the dark, they could hear this creature moving around them as if it were circling their position. When one of the women caught sight of the green and white vehicle driving along the fence, they decided to take it upon themselves to seek out the safety of an armed agent, much more protection than a bunch of unarmed men that they were with. The men soon joined the women, and they told the same story. Something big had been following them through the night. The group were more than happy to jump in the back of the vehicle and to get away from their unknown follower. When it was determined the group were not carrying any drugs and had not been deported, they were returned to Mexico, taking their chilling accounts with them. Having worked the brush over my 26-year career, I've seen some odd things. You hear sounds all around you in the dark. If you let your imagination run wild, you might just convince yourself there are monsters lurking in every arroyo. Only if you're that kind of person. Brushwalkers have spent most of their lives working, sleeping, and eating in the country. These people are not city folks. They know what is out there. So for them to have imagined this adventure is highly unlikely. What they need to be believed would be for others to corroborate their story. About a year later, east from the first encounter, there was a group of OTMs, that's other than Mexicans. This is an actual honest to God designation for aliens who are not from Mexico. This group of 2 men and 3 women were traveling through the ranch just east of where those 6 had been chased the year before. These OTMs had crossed the ranch very close to where the others had their bizarre encounter. At some point in their travel, something began to follow them. They became aware of the sound as whatever it was broke branches as it passed behind them. These aliens thought it might be a bull at first, but in the dim light they spotted what looked like a large, hair-covered creature, something kind of like a gorilla crashing through the brush as it moved around their position. The group were overcome with fear, not knowing what this dark being might do. They sought the safety of a thick clump of mesquite and they tried to hide. The creature began to circle their position. It would move around them, never getting close enough to see clearly, but always staying close enough that they could hear it moving. It kept them trapped for over an hour and a half. Imagine the fear as they lay there in the dark watching this tall, black form pass in front of them and then behind them. They had absolutely no means of defending themselves. Agent Chavez was working the same area when he saw the sign of these 5 crossing the fence from one ranch to the next. He followed them, opening any gates, and he had the advantage of being in a vehicle. That way, if anybody decided to run, well, it's hard to outrun a vehicle. As he drove along a dirt road looking for the group, they spotted him and came running. It dawned on Eddie, as he was looking at this group running towards his vehicle, that this was almost a repeat of what had happened a year before. Aliens become overwhelmed with fear after being chased by something through the brush. He asked the group for details of their encounter. He questioned them separately from each other. He figured they must have gotten their story from the last group. Even among the people crossing the border illegally, there's a kind of a pecking order. You have the smugglers who consider themselves above everyone else. Their their clients are considered to be subhuman. Their only value is the money that they will hand over. Once these people are out of the way, then you have the smugglees, the aliens that are just trying to get from point A to point B and they're not familiar with the area. Below them are the OTMs. They are kind of considered the bottom of the heap, and everybody not only takes advantage of them, but they won't even talk to them. Brushwalkers are mostly decent people just passing through looking for work, but they don't usually associate with anybody not from their hometown. We'll catch a group of 20 people, and all 20 of them will be from the same village somewhere in Mexico. They'll travel together, live together, work together, and return to their hometown together. OTMs, not being natives of Mexico, are not treated very well by the authorities or a lot of the inhabitants of Mexico. The police have been known to arrest people from South and Central America, take all their money, and then throw them out of the country. If the United States is the closest border, they will actually throw them into our country. And then we get to feed them and take care of them and, well, our tax dollars hard at work. Chances are the first group would not have spent time conversing with the second group. The two encounters must have been factual as to what the people really thought had occurred. Is there some kind of a giant black haired covered thing haunting the ranches to the northwest of Laredo? Each year, science discovers new and unknown creatures living in places where everyone thought it had been gone over thoroughly. Only time will tell if this thing is ever seen again. BPA Garza had an encounter not too far from the two previous run ins. Here is his story as well. This happened a few years back. This is in his own words. He said, I really don't recall the exact time. It must have happened about 2012. I was working mids, that's midnights, and I was assigned backup north of the checkpoint on I 35 with another agent who he thinks has now been transferred to Arizona. It was a routine night, and they made their basic cuts, checking places where people crossed fences or roads, and they responded to sensor traffic on the highways. It was probably about 2 a.m. when a sensor took a hit. This device was on a ranch under a set of high lines by a ladder. Now, a lot of ranchers get sick and tired of people climbing their fences because when they do climb a fence, they tend to tear it up. Some fences are so torn up by aliens crossing them that the cattle just walk back and forth from one ranch to another. Now, this has led to the ranchers building ladders over their fences. This is to alleviate all of the wear and tear that would otherwise happen. His partner was driving, so he advised the radio operator that they were on the way to check out the sensor hit. They approached the area with the lights off and they noticed that there were a bunch of cows moving around the area, and they figured it was probably just these animals that had sent off the device. They turned their lights on, they made their cuts looking for footprints. They even got out of the unit and they looked around the ladder, but they didn't see anything. They called the radio operator and they said that it was 1019, unfounded, and they left the area, telling the radio operators there were cattle in the area. His partner said he didn't know. Him and his partner didn't know it at the time, but when they were out checking the area, there was a scope truck operator nearby, and he was scanning the area with a thermal camera. After clearing the area, he said, we made it to the access road, which is a couple of miles away. We drove north on the west access road when the radio operator advised once more that the sensor was taking hits. Before I could advise it was more than likely animals, the scope truck operator called and said that he had good traffic in the area. He had eyes on at least 10 subjects crossing at the ladder. My partner and I responded. We went in tactical mode. That's lights out. You don't use the brakes unless you have to. As you approach, well, I'm not going to go into the details. We don't need to let Those people know how we do things. He said when we got close to the area, I told my partner I would jump out and get on the tracks. He would then drive over to the main road and watch the high lines, as that was the usual route of travel for these aliens. That's when things got interesting. He said, I walked over to the ladder and I used the low light to search for foot sign. I advised my partner of the sign description and of the direction of travel. I had my night vision goggles with me. The group was moving through some thick brush before they got on a cow trail going northeast, and they stayed on it till they hit the overgrown sendero that would run north and south. As I approached the sendero, I started feeling like I was near someone or something, like there was something in the brush nearby. I wasn't sure if it was an animal or the people. Something didn't feel right. So I got out my radio and I attempted to contact my partner. But I didn't realize that I was in a low area, and I thought, well, my partner couldn't copy me and I couldn't copy him. We used line of sight radios, which meant if there was anything between you and the antenna, well, your radio transmissions didn't get through. Standing there on the sendero, I began to hear brush breaking just to the southeast of my location, maybe 20 yards away, and it was coming quickly. It sounded like I had spooked the group and they were breaking a lot of brush, only the breaking of the brush was coming my way. I remember thinking it's probably a bunch of cows or the group is coming my way. It was loud, so I got on the radio and I put out the information. Since I was in the low area, nobody heard me. When you find yourself in a situation like this, you still make the call. Anybody close enough to hear you won't know you're not in contact with anyone. Plus, if the radio does get through, well, now you have help coming. I remember to make myself a low target. I got down on one knee and I began to scan with my NVGs. I was facing east southeast, and there was a gap between about 20 feet between small trees where I knew I would get a good look of whatever or whoever was coming my direction. What I saw with my NVGs I couldn't explain. I froze. I watched this extremely tall, wide, hairy looking animal person, and it was walking on two legs. I remember its arms reached pretty low to its knees. This thing cleared the 20-foot gap with only 3 to 4 steps. It never looked at me until it made it just north of my position, maybe 20 feet away. It was real close. It stood behind an average sized tree, approximately 7 feet or so, and this thing was looking over the top. It literally moved the tree from side to side, the way you'd use your arm to move a window curtain. It stared at me, and I stared at it. At that point, I had my right hand on my weapon. Not a bad idea. I was frozen. This lasted just a few seconds, but it felt like forever. This thing released the tree and began walking back in the direction it had come from. When it passed that 20-foot gap again, it only took 3 to 4 steps. As soon as it started breaking brush, moving away from me to where I felt kind of safe, I took off running northbound. I know it's not common for us as Border Patrol agents to be spooked, but after seeing that thing, I didn't feel safe even with my pistol. I made it to the Cerrito main road where I was finally able to get out on my radio. My partner arrived and he said that they had been trying to get me on the radio and that the group had been spotted on the northbound lane. He noticed I was kind of shook up and he asked if I was okay, and he said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I haven't really shared this story with anybody other than maybe a handful of trusted agents. His story fits in with the story from the two groups that were traveling through the ranches that Eddie ran into. I don't like repeating things from previous stories, but this one, it needed repeating. It makes me wonder, is there something out there running around in the brush that possibly could be dangerous? Or is it simply there trying to scare people so that it can feed on the energy? Uh, it's surprising that Bigfoot or Bigfoot type creatures or even Dogman has been spotted in and around Laredo. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your neighbors they should be listening in as well. If you didn't enjoy the show, well, I'm sorry. Well, what can I do? I'll give you your money back. How's that? Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they're strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.